Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Table. I am your guest host, Lucas Robbins. With me is Mason Roach. We're currently filling in for, of course, Austin and Luke. They are taking some personal time, but I will be filling in for just today. And I'm the lead writer of The Blue Stable. Mason is also one of our co-writers. Say hi, Mason.
Hello, guys. Happy to be here. Happy to help out Austin and Luke.
All right. Well, we're really excited to get into this because we also share a league with Luke and Austin. It's a very competitive league right now with a lot of us going head to head. Right now, there are 5 teams that are 4-4 and 3 teams that are 5-3. Each of us are, of course, amongst those 8 teams, and it's a very, very tight situation. But despite no one being an absolute dominant force so far, it has been a very, very fun season, and anyone can beat anyone. And let's start off with this episode talking about the big headlines that are going on right now. And the biggest one in fantasy right now is Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry has been an absolute dominant force, but unfortunately, he suffered an injury versus the Colts early last week, and he's going to be out for at least 6 weeks, maybe 10, which would make him out of the entire fantasy season in worst case scenario. So let me get your thoughts on this, Mason. What do you think of the Derrick Henry injury situation?
So it's definitely a huge blow for the Titans, but it's an even bigger blow fantasy-wise. We know so many people that had gotten Derrick Henry first or second or even third overall and have relied heavily on him, especially with the enormous amount of carries that he gets per game. Him going down really hinders some fantasy owners because they may have not needed to go out and get running backs off the waiver wire because of how good Derrick Henry's doing. So it really puts them at a standstill and have to, get a waiver wire pickup to fill in the void, especially with not knowing how long Derrick Henry will be out for.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a critical blow for a lot of these teams because a lot of fantasy players did not have the handcuff for Derrick Henry, and there wasn't really a clear-cut one anyways. I mean, you saw, we'll go into the backups in a minute, but it's definitely a big blow to them. There's going to be a big scramble on the waiver wire for the new starting tight running backs for the Titans, which we'll get into in a bit. But beyond just the Derrick Henry owners, this is also very big news for Ryan Tannehill owners, for AJ Brown owners, and especially for Julio Jones owners as well. I mean, will it be a positive impact for some of them, or will it be a negative impact for some of them? My take, though, is that it is going to be a very positive one for AJ Brown. Ryan Tannehill, I could see it being a little bit mixed. He might not be as efficient. He might throw more turnovers as teams are going to be expecting to pass a lot more with a lot less loaded boxes. But that emphasis on the pass is going to lead to higher volume for AJ Brown and Julio Jones whenever he gets healthy. Mason, what are your thoughts on the surrounding talent for the Titans offense and how it affects them fantasy-wise with this Henry injury?
I think I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say that it's mostly positive, especially because I'm not saying they wanted Henry to get injured, but Henry getting injured opens up the passing game with these star-studded wide receivers that they signed to specifically help Henry out. So now that Henry's not there, we can see what the wide receivers are truly made of and see if Ryan Tannehill can carry this team without his security blanket in Derrick Henry.
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting situation, especially since the Titans are one of the heaviest play action offenses. So even without him on the field, that's a big impact because they relied so heavily on getting those stacked boxes to open up the field. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do as a team reality wise, and it'll have a lot of big impacts on the fantasy community. But beyond just the Derrick Henry injury, there's also some other injuries we got to go over. But let's also talk about one of the highest rated wide receivers pre-draft. He's now taking a mental health break. Calvin Ridley. He has not been very good so far for fantasy relative to expectations. He's been the wide receiver 14 on the 41 on the season so far in PPR leagues. But beyond that, of course, we have no idea as fantasy owners how long he's going to be out. We wish him all the best of luck. And it's very vague right now about what kind of mental health situation he's going through. My heart goes out to him, of course, and hopefully he gets his mind right, not just for fantasy football or for NFL in general, but just for his life. But for now, let's focus more so on the fantasy implications, though. How does this Calvin Ridley news affect fantasy owners right now, Mason?
It affects them quite a bit because I'm not saying the Falcons are an offensive juggernaut, but when you have Calvin Ridley, the emergence of Patterson and Pitts, you have 3 viable pass catchers in the Falcons offense any day of the week. And Calvin Ridley being Calvin Ridley, like you said, he was one of the highest rated wide receivers coming into this year's fantasy draft because of his usage, because of his success over the last 2 years. Especially with Julio being gone, there's a lot of pressure on Calvin, and he garnered that pressure. And that's what opened up stuff for Pitts and Patterson. So with Ridley taking his leave for his mental health break, it really opens up not only more reps for Patterson in both running and passing, but leads Pitts to emerge even more than he already has.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to open up a lot more opportunities for the surrounding talent. The offense as a whole will be worse, so I'd say there's less scoring opportunities for some of these guys. But also for fantasy managers, there is no way to know how long he's going to be out at this point. He could be out for maybe a week. He could be out for the rest of the season. Who knows? So I wouldn't say that he is a cut, of course. If you have a IR spot, he might be eligible for it potentially. So I'd probably stash him there in your league. But beyond that, I mean, you can't cut him unless you know for a fact that he's going to be out for the season in a redraft league. So you just got to hold on. But if you trade him away, you could be trading him very, very low at value right now. But you might actually be able to get something if he's out for the season. So a lot of questions for fantasy managers to consider as they handle this situation. There is no definitive answers, so I can't really give you anybody sound advice on this because, like all fantasy owners, we just don't know at this point. So beyond that, moving on from him, we also got Von Miller's injury, and that is a very big injury, not in the fantasy element unless you're in IDP leagues, but if you own the Rams defense, which a good amount of people, it wasn't the Von Miller injury. Sorry, he was traded. The injury I'm referring to, is the JJ Watt injury for the Cardinals defense. And the Cardinals defense was a top 3 unit before his injury. So they have been very, very relied upon in the fantasy community. How does the JJ Watt injury affect the Cardinals defense going forward there, Mason?
Well, it takes a big chunk of their pass rush away. And you might be asking, oh, why do you say that, Mason? JJ Watt hasn't really produced much this year. Well, it's because he's JJ Watt and he garners so much attention and pressure from other teams' offensive lines that it opens up, rushes for Chandler Jones and the rest of the union. With JJ Watt being gone, you have a star that's left in the dust, and the Cardinals don't have the firepower on their front seven as much anymore. The other teams will just have to focus on Chandler Jones, and that's it. And that will leave to a weak spot on maybe one weak side of the ball where JJ was. They'll attack that side, and it will eventually open up plays for them to open up the Cardinals secondary. And that's what you've seen this last week with not being able to have JJ. It's really going to hurt the Cardinals.
So another aspect of it was they were going up against Aaron Rodgers, who can take advantage of nearly any defense, except for, of course, week 1 this year. But beyond that, he has been one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So there's very little sample size without him this year, of course. So we'll have to see what develops there. But I wouldn't say that the Cardinals are a defense to target if you're streaming against defenses for like various different positions, but it will be a concern going forward for Cardinals defense owners. Beyond that, we also have another injury, Rob Gronkowski. He has unfortunately gotten yet another injury. He has been a phenomenal tight end. Everyone knows that Rob Gronkowski, when healthy throughout his career, has been one of the most dominant fantasy tight ends of all time. But of course, as the years have gone on, the injuries have added up, and he has yet another one this season. How does the Rob Gronkowski injury affect not just Gronk owners, but for the rest of the Bucs offense?
It certainly opens things up for the three-headed monster of Brown, Godwin, and Evans. And I'm one of those heavy Buck owners. I have Godwin and Evans in one of my leagues. With Gronk being out, it opens up even more pass-happy situations for those wide receivers. The Buccaneers really only use Fournette in the running game. And if Fournette gets more touches because of the Gronk injury, it will only open up the passing game more for the three-star potential number one wide receivers on every single other team that the Bucs have. Their offense is so stacked that them losing Gronk doesn't really become a negative for them, but becomes a negative for fantasy owners because people relied on Gronk so heavy for end zone and red zone looks, because that's what he's known for with Tom Brady.
Yeah, that definitely helps out all the three-headed monster of wide receivers. It also definitely helps out Leonard Fournette, because a lot of the tight end targets and running back targets are kind of intermixed in the middle of the field at times. So as the kind of dump off options, and especially for red zone opportunities, he was their biggest red zone threat on their team. And without that, they might decide to run a little bit more inside the 5 and 10 yard line, and that could give some scoring opportunities for Leonard Fournette, who has emerged as the RB1 to own in that Buccaneers offense. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle it. Of course, he got injured earlier in the season, so it's not as if fantasy owners haven't seen what this Bucs offense is like without Gronk. But of course, it is another blow for Gronk owners who are betting on that big comeback season with Tom Brady yet again. But beyond Gronk, we also have another big injury. Hold on. They'll cut it out. Don't worry. It keeps on cutting off, and then I have to scroll all the way back on. We also have the Jameis Winston injury. Now, famous Jameis has been an inconsistent, to say the least, fantasy quarterback, but his injury opens up the opportunity for Trevor Siemian, who played quarterback for them in this past game, or Taysom Hill, who everyone knows is the crazy gadget wide receiver, tight end, quarterback. And if Taysom Hill starts, that could have a very, very negative effect on the surrounding pass catchers. Particularly, we're talking Alvin Kamara, Marquez Callaway a little bit, Traquan Smith once he comes back, and even Michael Thomas, who is getting ready to come back as well. That volume is going to go down comparatively from Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston, and he is definitely a red zone vulture. Mason, what are your thoughts on the Jameis Winston injury and how it affects the Saints as a whole?
Well, it definitely leaves a deep hole at quarterback. And like you said, if Taysom Hill is healthy and they start him, the targets and looks and carries for all the other Saints players will go down, because it is obvious that when Taysom Hill is the starter for the Saints, the offense of play calling is different, because like you said, he is a Swiss Army knife. He's a gadget. He can do so many things. So Sean Payton plays into that. Now, if Trevor Siemian is starting, then you see him rely heavily on the running game with Kamara and the new addition of Mark Ingram. So with Jameis being hurt, it's only going to open up things for the running backs and potentially Michael Thomas once he gets back, because that will be another shoulder to lean on. They didn't have Michael Thomas this whole entire time when Jameis was there. Now Michael Thomas is coming when Jameis is gone. It's only going to be you're losing an eye for an eye. You lose your star quarterback, but you get your star wide receiver. And also, we've been hearing rumors that, Philip Rivers said, if the Saints contact me about playing quarterback, I'm open to listening. So guys, be aware and watch for that. Philip Rivers is a better fantasy quarterback than Trevor Siemian or Taysom Hill. If he gets signed, hop on that right away.
Yeah, I completely agree 100% on that. Rivers, he's not as mobile, of course, as Taysom Hill. No one's going to be considering Philip Rivers as a dual threat quarterback by any means. But in terms of a streaming option, if he gets signed by them, he might have a bit of a slow start as he kind of gets back into the swing of things because he is a retired quarterback. And it is purely speculation on whether or not he is going to return to the NFL. But if he does, the Saints have enough weapons out there to give him a very good shot at having a great, great season for them. And I feel like it would be very, very full circle to have Philip Rivers come in the year after Drew Brees retires for the Saints and helps them out in their dire straits right now at quarterback, considering their history previously in LA. So, or in with San Diego Chargers. So that is going to be very, very interesting to watch if that happens. Until then, I'd say Taysom Hill is the starter, but that is a very, very tentative thing at best right now. But beyond that, we also have some big news coming in because today was the NFL trade deadline. There was a lot of speculation on pieces being moved around this trade season. A lot of people were speculating, hey, Deshaun Watson could be moving to potentially the Dolphins. And because of that, maybe Tua is out of Miami. There's also speculation that maybe Ridley might be traded away because of his disappointing season, and maybe the mental health stuff could be related more so to the team, though, of course, that is purely speculation, and there's no definitive rumors on that. There's also speculation on Devontae Parker getting moved. There's speculation on Deshaun Jackson getting moved, though he has now been released. And there's also speculation of Marlon Mack of the Colts being traded away to a lot of these running back needy teams who have been suffering through injuries. And now we've finally gotten past the trade deadline. And you know what happened? None of those moves. Zero. Zilch. Nada. NFL teams did not bite on those trade opportunities or trade candidates. And because of that, a lot of us are feeling a little bit more miffed and bored about the lack of headlines. But we also got to talk about what this means for fantasy. Ultimately, means that status is returning back to normal. Some of these guys might be a little miffed that they were even rumored to be on the trade block, and some of these rumors did have some teeth to it. But we'll see what happens for them. Beyond that, though, for fantasy owners, the trade deadline for a lot of us is still later on in the season. And so let's get into 2 sell high candidates and 2 buy low candidates in fantasy football. We'll each give 2 each on both of those categories. So let's start with Mason. Who is your first sell high candidate in fantasy football before these trade deadlines begin?
So right now, Lucas, my sell high candidate, the first one, is Michael Pittman Jr. He has had an insane amount of production over the last 4 weeks, and he has really taken strides and steps to show that he is the true number 1 for the Colts. And if you need to trade him for a running back because your team is the one that doesn't have Derrick Henry anymore, he is the perfect piece to trade and get somebody with value back. He's only getting better, and his stock is only on the rise, especially with T.Y. Hilton getting hurt again. It's only going to open up more receptions and targets for MPJ and the Colts.
Yeah, Ty, he got injured again last game. Unfortunately, he is not going to be playing in Thursday Night Football, and we haven't yet gotten an update on how long he's going to be out. But he is in the concussion protocol, so maybe he'll be back in Week 10. It is to be determined. But of course, Michael Pittman Jr. has been a very, very good borderline. Like, he was a strong wide receiver too for a lot of teams. And over the last few weeks, he's been producing like a wide receiver 1. So if you can sell him at that wide receiver 1 value that he's been producing for the last few weeks and get a pretty solid running back out of that, I'd say that is a very smart move for fantasy owners, especially if they're in redraft leagues. Dynasty, I'd probably keep on to him and have him a lot higher, of course, since he is still so young. But we'll see what happens with him overall. My sell high candidate, the first one for me, is Jordan Howard. Now, Jordan Howard might not have been on a lot of fantasy teams, but the ones that he was, or if you pick him up this waiver wire, because, of course, the Eagles' run offense was insane this past week. They only had 13 pass attempts, and they divvied up the runs a lot between Jalen Hurts, who is a absolute vulture to running backs. They divvied up between him, Boston Scott, and a little bit of their rookie running back, Kenneth Gainwell, all in the absence of Miles Sanders. The problem is deciding which of these three is going to be the most productive one any single week is going to be very, very hard to predict. And of the three, I feel like Jordan Howard is the one who might have the most red flags, but he was the second highest producer last week behind only Boston Scott. He was producing nearly solely because of his red zone opportunities. He is a very, very fun red zone option, but Hurts is an absolute vulture in that situation, as is Dallas Goedert, who is their number one red zone threat. And it is very tough to predict those touchdowns from week to week in this Eagles offense. So ultimately, I'd avoid Jordan Howard if possible. And if you can sell him right now for a more usable and consistent fantasy option, especially a flex target, I'd say go for that right now. Mason, what is your second sell high?
My second sell high may seem a little unorthodox, but I'm going with the Rams defense. I think with this trade, to get Von Miller, makes the Rams defense more valuable, and their front seven gets even stronger. You have Von Miller, Aaron Donald, and Leonard Floyd on the same front seven. Then you pair that with the secondary of Jalen Ramsey and the rest of that crew. That team is going all in, and they have the defense to do it. So if you have a stellar backup defense, I would trade the Rams defense for anything you can get. A needy running back, a low tier wide receiver, a starting tight end because you have Gronk. You can do it. Pair that defense with something, and it will get the job done. Getting Von Miller on that team has to be enticing for fantasy owners. That potential sack production is very high with those three on the front seven.
Absolutely. That is going to be a very, very interesting defense. You could get some really good value from that defense selling it right now. Teams might be overvaluating or how great Von Miller is at this point in his career. And so if you can sell the Rams defense as one of the top 3 units in the NFL because of this hype and possibly get a different defense and some solid backup players for depth, that would be a very, very interesting move for a lot of fantasy owners to do. Right now, my second sell high, Randall Cobb. Cobb has been, he had a very, very interesting game this past week. He had 5 targets, only 3 receptions, and only 15 yards. But he had 2 touchdowns coming back with, of course, Aaron Rodgers. He's finally reunited with him. He's coming off of the injury previously, but those 2 touchdowns are going to inflate his value a little bit right now. Plus, Devontae Adams is coming back. MVS is coming back. Alan Lazard is coming back. He's not going to be the wide receiver 1 once all these guys are coming back this upcoming week because they weren't able to play on Thursday Night Football. So because of that, Randall Cobb, some players might be thinking, hey, this might be a legit wide receiver 3/flex, maybe wide receiver 4 for depth, just because he has Aaron Rodgers, he has the chemistry with them, and he's reunited with them. But if you can send him to a wide receiver needy team right now, and get some solid value out of him, I would definitely do that right now. So now let's go into our 2 buy lows. Mason, I'll let you start it off again. Who is your first buy low?
My first buy low is Mark Ingram. And it is Mark Ingram because he got traded back to his ex-girlfriend. He knows the Saints offense. And you already seen, as soon as he got traded, they inserted him in right away. And that was before the Jameis injury. Now, with the Jameis injury, they're going to rely heavily on the running backs even more because of all the skill and IQ that they lost at the quarterback position. Mark Ingram is the perfect he's the perfect handcuff to Kamara, and he's done this before. Okay, he will get you yardage, and he will be a viable streaming or backup running back for the time being. If you can get him for a struggling wide receiver or a struggling tight end, go right ahead and do it, because Mark Ingram can still garner enough value to get a touchdown or even take away, 10 carries from Kamara.
I absolutely agree. That is a very interesting point on that. He is going to be a vulture from Kamara. He might have some standalone value in the meantime as like kind of a flex play. And should anything happen to Kamara, he becomes a possible RB1 for as long as he's out. Bare minimum, he's going to be a strong RB2 just because of the volume that he gets in that Saints offense. But my buy low candidate is another running back who has a lot of hype. But this one was a round 1 wide receiver in many people's drafts, Dalvin Cook. He has had a pretty disappointing year so far. He started off very, very hot, but then injuries caught up to him yet again, and he was forced out. Alexander Madison did pretty well in his stead for several games. Now he's come back, and he hasn't quite looked the same so far, but he has a very, very good schedule down the stretch with a lot of easy matchups. But will he be able to get right soon? I do not know. And at this point, a lot of Dalvin Cook owners might be a little bit lower in the standings right now. They might be panicking. They might feel like they need absolute production right now, and they might be a little bit worried. If you're at a very, very high record right now, you're at a 8-0, a 7-1, a 6-2, heck, maybe even a 5-3, and you have a decent amount of space right now, I would buy in to Dalvin Cook right now. Bet on the comeback, bet on the volume, hope he gets healthy. It's a bit of a risky pick, of course, I'm not going to lie, because the injuries have been a recurring thing throughout his career. He's missed more games than Joe Mixon since they've come out of college, which surprises a lot of people, but it's the reality. And ultimately, he is going to be a very high volume back when he is starting. Very, very valuable. But if that value is sunk a little bit right now and you can get him for a solid wide receiver 2, maybe borderline wide receiver 1, I might make that deal right now. So beyond that, Mason, what is your second buy low candidate right before this trade deadline?
I'm going to go with Devin Singletary. And I'm going with Devin Singletary because Bill's offense is a powerful juggernaut in its own. And, Josh Allen, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, Stephon Diggs, they have the quarterback and the wide receivers. Well, the running game isn't used as much in Buffalo as I think it should be. They have Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. Devin Singletary handles the running downs. Zach Moss is more of the receiving back. So as of right now, as the Bills lean offensively on passing, Singletary's value goes down because he's not getting as much carries. So that opens up the possibility to trade for him because his value is so low. You never know at the end of the year if they will start running the ball again and you got Devin Singletary for little to nothing because everybody dropped him or put him on the trade block because they had high expectations. That's when you come in to swoop him because everybody's writing him off. He could end up saving you 1 week if you have an injury right now, or even Derrick Henry, Chris Carson, CMC, Dalvin Cook, any of the running backs that have had injuries, he can be an insurance policy. And he's so little in value right now that it won't cost much to get.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. His value has definitely very, very low right now. You buy low on that, and he could reward you big time in that very, very profitable Bills offense. A lot of red zone opportunities there. They don't run the ball a whole lot, but when they do, and especially with all the red zone opportunities, he could get some really, really fun scoring opportunities in volume. Now, my final buy low candidate is Terry McLaurin, Mr. Indiana football, during my senior year of high school. I absolutely love Terry McLaurin as a player. Always wanted him to come to the Colts during draft night. Unfortunately, they went a bit different direction and picked a different Ohio State wide receiver. But Terry McLaurin has been a phenomenal wide receiver for the Washington football team, despite some very, very inconsistent quarterback play. But because of that inconsistent quarterback play, he has not been very consistent this year at all. In fact, he has had 3 games where he's gone 25 to 30 points and been an absolute dominant force this season out of the 8 games that he's played. And then the other 5 games, every single one of them, he's had 10.2 points or lower, which is not good considering where we drafted him. So why am I buying low on him? Is there a change in quarterback? No, not right now. Is the schedule opening up? A little bit, because right now he is on a bye. He has been very inconsistent in the last 4 weeks, where he's had a 8.6 game versus the Saints in a very favorable matchup, a 6.8 in a very favorable matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. He had a big explosion against the Packers for 25 points, and then only a 6.5 point game against the Broncos. Very up and down throughout the last 4 weeks. But why am I buying in on him besides just the bye week? He's also had insane volume throughout the season. He has had a 14 target game. He's had a 13 target game. He's had an 11 target game. He's had a 12 target game. He's only had 1 game this season below 7 targets. So the volume is there. It just hasn't been efficient from the quarterback standpoint. Though Ryan Fitzpatrick might be returning soon and getting healthier and changing up from Taylor Heineke. And he has some pretty good chemistry early on in the season with Ryan Fitzpatrick. That's the quarterback that he worked out with this whole entire offseason. And Ryan Fitzpatrick tends to hyper target his wide receiver ones and gets them a lot of volume. Unfortunately, with Heineke, he is a very mobile quarterback who has stolen a few red zone opportunities from Terry McLaurin. He is a vulture. Right now, Antonio Gibson, he's banged up. He's not quite the same threat right now. So because of that, I'm not betting on Gibson too much right now. I'm betting on Terry McLaurin being the piece that starts to break out towards the end of the year. He's got a few favorable matchups, a few not so favorable matchups. But as long as he gets those targets and he converts them into these receptions that he has a very, very reliable hands for, it is going to be very, very interesting to see him bounce back. Despite the inconsistencies, he's still the wide receiver 14. So buy low on this. He might be going as a wide receiver 2 right now. Terry McLaurin right now has been a very, very inconsistent presence right now, but he's the wide receiver 14 on the year. So you might be able to get him for a wide receiver 2 value, and he might return wide receiver 1 value in your trade. So see what you can get, put some feelers out there for Terry McLaurin, kind of buy low on his inconsistent stretch right now. And he might end up winning some championships by the end of this season. So moving on from our buy low and sell high section, we got a very, very interesting one next, the waiver wire. Because right now there's a lot of talent out there, a few bye weeks, especially for a few teams out there. So let's see, who do we think is going to be the waiver wire targets for our fantasy managers? Mason, I'm going to start with you. Who's going to be the quarterback target for you on the waiver wire this week?
So I'm actually looking at 2 different quarterbacks because I really couldn't decide. I went with Justin Fields and Mike White. Okay. And Justin Fields, not necessarily that he had a breakout game last week, but he showed how valuable he can be outside of the pocket, making plays with his legs. He is slowly improving every week, and it seems like the Bears are trusting him more. So if you are struggling at quarterback or have a bye week, pick up Justin Fields and slip him in for a waiver wire start. Now, moving forward to Mike White, in his first start as a rookie against the Bengals, in place of an injured Zach Wilson, he threw for over 405 yards and had 3 touchdowns. He had as good of a first start as you could ever have. Now, moving forward to the short week against the Colts pass defense is not good. So he is definitely should be on your watch for a potential waiver wire start.
Absolutely. Mike White he had a very, very impressive debut. Colts pass defense has been very favorable to wide receivers in fantasy this year. So that's going to be an interesting opportunity for him this week. My waiver wire quarterback, Taysom Hill, if healthy, versus the Atlanta Falcons. Because he's going to have some interesting red zone opportunities versus them. He's that gadget guy. He's going to have a lot of rushing opportunities. If healthy, he could be a very interesting option against a very porous Falcons defense. But if he's not healthy, I go Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Bridgewater is going up against the Dallas defense, which is one of the bottom 5 defenses against quarterbacks. I have as my quarterback besides Taysom Hill, I'm going with Teddy Bridgewater against the Cowboys. The Cowboys have been one of the bottom 5 defenses against the quarterback. I feel like he's going to be due for a very, very good game, and you can get him on a vast amount of teams for a sleeper. He is under 30% owned on sleeper leagues. So add him for this week if you need a waiver wire ad for your quarterback spot.
Moving forward, guys, we're going to go to our running backs for waiver wire watch. My first running back for the waiver wire watch, I am choosing Boston Scott. I know we talked about the Eagles running game earlier in the show and how actually inconsistent it could be. But I think that's exactly why you should go after Boston Scott, because the injury to Miles Sanders opens up all these carries for the 3 Eagles running backs that Lucas mentioned earlier, because none of them are a true number 1, or at least a number 1 in the coach's eyes. And that's exactly why you've seen Boston Scott get carries, Jordan Howard get carries, and Gainwell. So look for Boston Scott to be a quick waiver wire pickup if you are an injury needy running back team.
I agree. Boston Scott, of them, between him and Gainwell are my two picks, but I feel like Boston Scott is going to have a little bit more of a role than Gainwell. He's been very inconsistent this season. But beyond that, my running back waiver wire ads, I'd be looking squarely at the Titans running backs. Right now, they signed Adrian Peterson all day. He has been their new signing at running back, and he's going to get that kind of semi-Derrick Henry role. He's not going to be getting as much volume as Derrick Henry. It's not going to be 100% absorbed by Adrian Peterson, but he's going to get the run volume around like anywhere from 15, possibly 20, maybe even 25 carries depending on the game. So he's going to have some solid volume versus a lot of a pretty decent schedule for the Titans. They have some really easy teams and some really tough teams on the horizon. But Adrian Peterson, he's going to get a good amount of volume on the ground. Might not get as much in the air, so you won't be getting him as much for a PPR league. But he's also going to be getting those red zone opportunities compared to McNichols. Mason, what do you think on McNichols versus Peterson for the tight ends running backs? Or for the Titans running backs?
Adrian Peterson will definitely have more value for the Titans, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go after McNichols, because McNichols will have a lot of value receiving-wise. Like you said, he'll be more of a change of pace back to Peterson. And with Peterson being so old and kind of removed from football, he's not going to have the crazy production, like you said, that Derrick Henry is having. So, because of his age and because of this, how quick this is unfolding, I really see McNichols being able to have good value and get good production considering his role in the Titans offense. So please, for another waiver wire running back, look for McNichols if you're really hurting.
Absolutely. That's going to be a very interesting situation to watch unfold for the Titans. Now let's go into the wide receivers. For me, my wide receiver waiver wire pick is Elijah Moore. With Mike White's emergence, he could be the new wide receiver one for them. He got 6 targets this past week, but he also got 6 targets the week before with Zach Wilson. So if Zach Wilson gets healthy, he will be pretty decently targeted there. The rookie wide receiver has been very inconsistent considering injuries and some lack of playing time, but he's getting a bigger role right now. And his week 9 opponent is, of course, the Colts, who have not been a good passing defense. They could go Jamison Crowder, who has been more so their wide receiver one in the interim, or Corey Davis. But those guys are more slot receivers. Elijah Moore, he's been utilized a little bit more outside, which is where teams can really pick apart the Colts defense, especially against Xavier Rhodes. So I expect Elijah Moore to have a very solid game and be rising up on your waiver wire priority.
My waiver wire choice for wide receiver is Denver Broncos wide receiver Tim Patrick. And I know Jerry Jeudy just came back and he, kind of made a splash, but not really last week. Even though Jeudy came back, Tim Patrick still played over 90% of the snaps offensively for the Broncos and still garnered at least 5 to 6 targets on average throughout this entire season. The thing about Tim Patrick, though, is that every time he catches the ball, he gains a lot of yards. So that means Bridgewater really throws him the ball on the outside for a deep threat. And that's exactly what Tim Patrick is. If you need a fill-in deep threat wide receiver with potential to get a long touchdown, Tim Patrick is your guy.
I agree. Tim Patrick has definitely been stepping up in Judy's absence, and they might be easing Judy a little bit back into it. So I think that Tim Patrick will still have some usage for the next few weeks. To be determined what will happen if Judy gets to 100%. But even still, considering how porous the Denver Broncos defense has been at times, that could be a very good play for teams. My waiver wire tight end, though, is Tyler Conklin. Conklin is a volume-based play for your tight ends, and he's going to be going up against, of course, the Baltimore Ravens defense, which is the worst defense against the tight ends this season. I would be very interested in getting him. He has been very, very solid. He's gotten anywhere from 4 to 8 targets a game, every single game with the exception of one. He is the tight end 15 despite a bye week and only 1 touchdown on the season. So I believe that the touchdowns will positively regress. He isn't the number 1 or even the number 2. And if Dalvin Cook is healthy, though he isn't, if he's healthy, he's not even the wide receiver or the target number 3 in this passing game. But he gets solid volume. They are a high volume passing attack right now because of how terrible their defense is. And going up against the Baltimore Ravens offense, which is going to score a lot with Lamar Jackson and has a big weakness against the tight end, expect Conklin to feast for week 9.
My waiver wire tight end for people that are in a pinch with bye weeks is CJ Uzomah. And I decided to go with CJ Uzomah because him and Burrow have a good connection. Outside of Burrow throwing to Jamar Chase and the 2 wide receivers next to Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, Uzomah and Burrow seem to connect at least every game. And there's been 2 games this year already where Uzomah was under the radar, not picked up by virtually anybody, and he scored over 20 points, okay? So he has the ceiling to go off, but he also has the floor to completely bust. So this is a very special situation when getting him. You have to know what you're getting before you choose him. You can be getting 10, 15 points, 20 points at best, or you can only get 5 to 7 because of how little he may be targeted that game. It really depends on how successful the Bengals offense is from week to week basis. So take that risk and see where it gets you.
Yeah, he's definitely a roll of the dice, but he could be a very, very big target for you and could work out very well for teams. But, of course, he's risky. So if you want to play it a little bit more safe, probably go Conklin. But if you want to go for that kind of Hail Mary, I'd say go for Uzomah. Beyond that, we now have our starts of the week, who we feel is going to be some of the best plays this week. We're going to go 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end, and we're also going to go a defense. So I'll start it off. My start of the week at quarterback, Joe Burrow versus the Browns. Joe Burrow, I believe in Joe Burrow. He has been phenomenal this year. The Bengals offensive line has surprised me with their ability to keep him healthy despite not prioritizing taking Sewell in the draft. Jonah Williams and Riley Reef have really stepped it up at left tackle and right tackle respectively to kind of keep him healthy. And their interior offensive line has surprised me as well. But the big thing that has really helped him out this year, Jamar Chase. He has been electric. Currently the wide receiver 3 in fantasy as a 21-year-old rookie. So if you got him in a keeper league or better yet, a dynasty league, hold on to him or sell him at a premium price because he has been phenomenal and is going to be great for a long time. But beyond that, for just this week, Joe Burrow is a great, great matchup against the Browns. The Browns defense has not been good this season at all, despite heavy hype heading into the season. And most of that's been because of injuries. So They're not getting much healthier this week. It's not going to be a great week because it's going to be a very high-scoring affair on both sides, with both defenses getting blistered against both offenses because the Browns really struggle against the pass, and the Bengals kind of really struggle against the run comparatively to their pass defense. And that's exactly the strengths for both offenses. It's going to be a high-scoring game, and Joe Burrow is going to be asked to do a lot for the Bengals to win. So I expect Joe Burrow to have a very strong game this week. Mason, who is your start of the week quarterback?
My start of the week for the quarterback position is Mike White. And I know I mentioned Mike White earlier on the waiver wire, but that's literally because of how valuable he could be for this 1 week start against the Colts on a short leash on Thursday night. We all know Colts defense, top 5 rush defense with how they've been performing. But with injuries to their secondary and their cornerbacks, the Colts pass defense is atrocious, and they love to give up big plays. And it is definitely the Achilles heel. So Mike White is primed to make another big game happen in place of Zach Wilson. So be wary. If you see anybody, pick him up and start him. Don't be surprised if he goes off and gets 25, 30. But don't be surprised if he busts. He's only played 1 game. So you have to take this move with a grain of salt. He's a rookie. You can have your high hopes, and I'm having high hopes for him, but he could falter.
I agree. He's going to be a very interesting, risky play for teams right now. My running back start of the week is going to be Jonathan Taylor, the RB3 in fantasy this year so far, and he has been a very consistent presence in fantasy right now. He started off a little slow with 2 very poor games in week 2 and 3, but since then, he's had at least 16 points every single game and has had over 20 points in all but 1 game. And that 1 game was in a atmospheric river conditions. And he still was putting up 16 points, which is pretty solid. But ultimately, his volume is pretty stable. He gets anywhere from 14 to 18 carries a game. And he's gotten 3 catches every single week except versus the Houston Texans in week 6 over the last 5 weeks. So very consistent volume. He's also very efficient with that. He is phenomenal. He has one of the highest yards per carry in the league. He has the most 30-yard runs in the NFL right now. And he can break it deep even as a receiver. So he's going to be a very, very strong player for this season overall. But right now, he has a prime matchup against the Jets. The Jets are a bottom 5 defense against the running backs, and I expect Jonathan Taylor to do very, very strongly against them. They might rely on him a little bit more this week because of their frustrating loss against the Titans, and the Colts are getting a little desperate for a playoff run. So expect Jonathan Taylor to get possibly even more volume, and because of that, feast on a very, very porous Jets defense.
I definitely agree with that sentiment. And moving forward from that, my running back start of the week will be Naji Harris against the Bears. Okay, Naji Harris coming in to this season as a rookie was rated very highly on fantasy boards. And I don't know about you, but I was wary and kind of, a little scared to pick him with my first pick or second pick. But I'm glad I did in at least 1 league. And that's because he garners so much attention and carries on both sides of the ball that his value skyrockets. He can get you 15, 20, carries running the ball, but then he can get you between 5 to 15 even targets passing the ball, because that's how much Big Ben relies on him because of Big Ben's lack of arm strength. It's check down time all the time. And with the Bears not having Khalil Mack next week, it leaves the ability for Big Ben to not have to worry about an insane pass rush from the Chicago Bears, giving him more time to find Harris in check down routes or over the middle routes, and even give Harris more ability to get through the middle of the line every time he runs the ball, because Khalil Mack is not manning it.
Absolutely. Naji Harris is a strong volume play, great runner, not a great offensive line like you said earlier, but he has been phenomenal this season and has a very, very strong matchup against the Bears right now, whose defense has not lived up to expectations over the last 2 weeks. My wide receiver start of the week, Deontay Johnson. He is currently the wide receiver 24 in season-long leagues, but that's a little bit misleading because he has missed 2 games compared to some of his contemporaries, one because of a bye week and one because of a short injury that he missed only 1 week and has since bounced back from and has performed spectacularly because he is a strong volume play. Overall, and per game, he is the wide receiver 11 in points per game. Borderline wide receiver 1 that not many people are talking about because of those 2 absences kind of depressing his season-long value on the rankings. But he is a insane volume play. He has had over 10 targets per game in all but one of his games that he has played. And even in that one game that he played, he had only 2 catches, but he had 72 yards and a touchdown. He is Big Ben's favorite go-to wide receiver in this offense. And Big Ben might not be the best quarterback right now anymore, but he will hyper-target Deontay Johnson relentlessly. And he's going up against the Bears as well, who has not been a great defense, like you said in your Naji Harris piece. I'm expecting Deontay Johnson to continue to get that great volume against a poor Bears defense. And I'm expecting him to get that reliable anywhere from 15 points to 24 points a game. They're remarkably consistent, and he is going to get a very, very strong workload yet again.
And moving forward from our Steelers love for fantasy this week, my wide receiver to start is Michael Pittman Jr. against the Jets. As we talked about earlier, Michael Pittman Jr. has really made a name for himself over this last 3 to 4 weeks. Injuries or not, he's really set himself apart offensively within the Colts system with his ability to get jump balls, his ability to get open, and his awesome connection with Carson Wentz. With the Jets defense that is atrocious and has given up a plethora of points throughout these last couple of weeks. I mean, 31 against the Bengals, 54 against the Patriots. They can't stop anything, okay? It is time for Michael Pittman to have another big game. Start him if you have him and feel confident with that start.
Though, like you said earlier, you start him with confidence, you sell high on him, like you said earlier. But beyond Michael Pittman Jr., he is going to be a very strong wide receiver for them. But for my tight end start of the week, I'm going Dallas Goedert. And normally, I like to chase the volume. And it's kind of weird because Jalen Hurts only had 14 attempts last week. So when you think about that, hey, that's not a high volume passing attack. And Jalen Hurts can be a vulture in the red zone, like I said earlier with the Jordan Howard piece. But what's the difference between Jordan Howard and Dallas Goedert? Well, in that 14 attempt game, guess how many targets went to Dallas Goedert? 7. Half of Jalen Hurts' targets were going to Dallas. So he's shown that he has earned a lot of love and respect from Jalen Hurts and a lot of trust overall. and he has performed pretty well over the last 2 weeks. He got 12 points in week 7 and 13.2 this past week. Now he's going up against the LA Chargers, who are the 32nd ranked defense against the tight ends in fantasy football. I believe that even if they aren't going to be in a very pass heavy system, which they're going to have to throw quite a bit against this Chargers defense, because they're going to have to be going up against Jalen Hurts' LA Chargers offense, which is a very high scoring one. They're going to have to play a lot of garbage time, try and catch up. And so who are they going to throw the ball to? They might throw it a little bit to the running backs. They might throw it a little bit to the running backs. But the number one guy for them right now is Dallas Goedert. Start him with confidence that he's about to feast for you at a very, very strong bargain price, especially because Zach Ertz is no longer in town.
And moving forward from Dallas Goedert, my start of the week for tight end is Mike Giuseki of the Miami Dolphins against the Houston Texans. Okay? Giuseki has had a big week last week and the week before, and he's been very consistent over these last 2 seasons as a starting tight end for the Dolphins. The Houston Texans, statistically, probably bottom 5 in both categories defensively, and they give up a lot of points. And it's usually a passing game on both sides. The Dolphins are going to get in front of the Texans quickly, and they're going to not take off the brakes. To Giuseki in the red zone is definitely a connection you want to be a part of. It will help you win fantasy games, especially this week. Expect a big day from Giuseki against a low tier Houston defense.
I agree. Giuseki has been a very, very strong start recently, and I think he has some good rapport with both Brissett and with Tua. So I think he is a very strong play right now. My defense start of the week, it's not going to be a hot take. I know this. It's a freezing cold take, but I love this defense this week. So I'm going to stick with my guns and play it safe with this. Going with the number 2 fantasy defense, averaging 11 points per game right now, and having a pretty solid matchup, I'm going with the Saints. The Saints are coming off of a 16-point fantasy performance against the reigning Super Bowl winning offense, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They are a very opportunistic, very strong pass rush defense, and now they're going up against the Atlanta Falcons. Matt Ryan, he has not turned over the ball very much so far, but that Falcons offensive line has been giving up quite a few sacks and quite a few pressure opportunities. The Saints will be able to get after Ryan Tannehill quite a bit and maybe lure him into a bad decision or two, especially since he no longer has Calvin Ridley for this week to rely upon. The Saints defense is going to be able to hyper focus on a select few targets. Namely, they're going to try and stop Alvin Kamara and a little bit of Mark Ingram for this week. And in the Saints defense, no, they won't be stopping them. They'll be focusing more on Cordero Patterson and Kyle Pitts. Those are the 2 big names that are left. Cordero Patterson, he's a versatile threat, both in the running game and out wide. He's going to be a little bit of a matchup problem, but they can focus on him while really trying to cover a lot of the middle against Kyle Pitts. And they can absolutely go after Matt Ryan. They can dial up quite a few blitzes to try and get to him because that offensive line is not stopping them.
That is true. The Saints definitely have a great matchup against the Falcons, especially with Ridley not being able to play. And moving on from that, my defensive start for this week is the number 1 fantasy defense, the Buffalo Bills versus the lowly Jacksonville Jaguars.
Ooh, wow.
And I say to start the Bills because the Jags, they won't have James Robinson, okay? James Robinson got hurt last week. And necessarily, the Jags haven't been successful fluidly on offense, okay? They're starting Trevor Lawrence, who is, of course, we know the golden boy. And they have Chenault and Marvin Jones Jr., Dan Arnold, they have a ragtag group of guys, but it's nothing to get excited about. It's nothing where you look on the schedule and say, oh, I'm afraid of the Jaguars. Oh, I'm gonna stay away from them. No, the Jaguars have been so terrible over the last 2 years that they only have 2 wins. Okay, they should be the Bills and any other defense that plays against the Jaguars every single week should be a must start until the Jaguars can actually show that they can win a game. The camaraderie, the team atmosphere, everything about the Jaguars is weak right now. So start the Bills with 100% confidence that they will again get at least their 10.11 average, or even do more than that, because the Bills have really shut down some good teams this year.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. They are one of the best defenses in the league in terms of getting opposing offenses off the field very quickly, limiting scoring opportunities. They are a very strong defense in terms of pass rush right now, and also in creating turnovers. They are of course, deservedly, the number one defense in fantasy right now. And of course, Trevor Lawrence has thrown a lot of interceptions as a rookie quarterback, so there's going to be a lot of turnover opportunities for them. So that is a very, very strong pick. You're not going to be able to get them on the waiver wire, guaranteed. But if you have the Bills defense, you're going to be very happy this week, especially considering their matchup. And that will do it for the fantasy table. I am Lucas Robbins. Thank you.
I am Mason Roach.
Thank you to Mason as well. We are happy to be filling in for you guys, and hopefully you guys stick around and maybe get to see Austin next week as well as Luke. But if not, we'll be more than happy to fill in yet again. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.